So as I said, what I want to start with today is just going over the code in this tip calculator that we downloaded and modified and tweaked and did all kinds of stuff from Wenderlich. And just go over and talk about what's in that code briefly. The tip calculator class itself shouldn't be anything too mind-boggling for you. It's just got a couple of properties, a calculated property that returns the subtotal, an initialization method, and a couple of other methods that calculate the tips. Why he has these possible tips explicit versus inferred when they're both the same, he only uses the inferred. I think this is just maybe for another unit, or maybe it's left over from the first recording or the first tutorial that we never did because we jumped right into tutorial number 2.
Was it for the data type?
I think is he just kind of showing that you can say you want to double
Mm-hmm.
in those instead of.
Oh, okay, where this one's an inferred data type and this is an explicit data type, so it probably left over from one of the other recordings.
Yeah.
So that one isn't really necessary. The other thing I don't particularly like about this is that the tips are 15, 18, and 20%, and what if you wanted more? It would be kind of, different ways you could modify this class if you want to, but you get the idea. Questions about the class? I don't think that was causing people too much trouble. Okay. Then we'll go into the controller, and I think I'm going to sidetrack here just a little bit. I'm going to go back to my notes for Unit 5. Let's get myself in the right class here. My Unit 5 notes start off talking about delegates and protocols. Okay, what is a delegate and what is a protocol? And I think I might have them flipped here. It might be better to talk about a protocol versus talking about a delegate first. One of the things I recommend if you're still somewhat confused is take a look at these sources, not necessarily the iOS developer environment because that's one of those technical sites that Apple has created that only professionals can read and newbies like us can barely get our way through it. Right, but this source talks about delegates a little bit that I thought was good enough to document in my notes last year. Looked at it briefly. This is another source that talks about protocols and a different way to use them. A protocol is basically a set of rules saying if you want to communicate with me, you must provide these methods. So if we have a class that other classes want to communicate with, in the old days of Objective-C, we would say send a message to. I want to send a message to this class. I want to be able to communicate with it. To even open the door for communication, you have to have a set of methods. And sometimes it's 1, sometimes it's 2, sometimes it's none. All of the objects that you've used, the text views, the switches, the segments, all of those have a protocol as well. But the protocol is, you don't have to give me anything. Just an outlet to them type of thing. So they all have protocols, at least I think they do. Makes sense to me that all these objects have protocols. Because when we switched over to this one, we have this table view in our storyboard. It's just an object. But this object, if you want to use it, its protocol says you can use me, but you must provide 2 methods to communicate with me. The table view itself doesn't include those methods, but it needs that information that kind of links to them. So if the table view doesn't have it, then who does? The delegate. The delegate is just another class that communicates with this, provides it the information that it needs. The TableView controller knows how to display a table view. It has a scroll view embedded in it, so as you scroll through it, it updates its view. I think I mentioned to a few of you, I'm sure there wasn't a recording, so I'll add it to the recording here. The table view has built in it efficiencies so that it only displays the records, it only stores the the records that are visible, plus a couple on either side, above and below. So as you scroll through that table view, it's constantly updating itself, but it only has stored in its own memory enough data for what you see, plus a little bit more. Magic. Imagine if I had a database. I promised you before class that we'll someday tie this to a database, and the database that I've stolen off the web has 10,000 records in it. And I want to scroll through those in TableView. Imagine the amount of memory that it would take to store that information for 10,000 records inside the TableView. And with small iOS type portable mobile devices, you don't have that kind of memory. So the TableView has built in it the ability to show, let's pretend that there's room for 10 here, 10 records. And maybe one or two above and one or two below. So if you scroll up, it finds the other, it'll immediately show you the other two. When you scroll down, it immediately shows you the two from the top. But while you're scrolling, it's updating its views and saying, here are the 14 some odd records that I'm currently manipulating. And it updates itself, and it does all this magic stuff. In the C# class, I've been telling my students that text boxes and list boxes and combo boxes and even radio buttons are magic. Click on one radio buttons, the others turn off. Magic. Who wrote that? I don't care. Works. TableView does a lot of magic. It only shows as many records as it has room for, plus or minus a couple. And as you scroll, it updates that constantly, and it does it fast so that you can go fling, 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 and these records just go flying by. But there's never more than 10 or 15 of them in memory at any given time. Thank God. We didn't have to write that. It's built into the TableView. It knows how to do that, but what the TableView doesn't know is what kind of data do you want to display. And what it also needs to know before it can even start is potentially how many records am I going to have to deal with? What is the total number of records I have to deal with? Whenever you implement one of these, the delegate who's responsible for providing that information has to have those two methods. The protocol designates that those two methods are required. A protocol can also include optional methods. If you wish, it'd be nice if you gave me this, it'd be nice if you gave me that, it'd be nice if you gave me this other thing. But you don't have to because the TableView can function without it. We'll see some more of those in today's example where we actually implement some of the optional methods to delete rows from the table, to insert new rows into the table. If all you want is a table view that you can go flinging through, then we don't need delete and we don't need insert. It's just a list. It's a list box. Those two pieces of information, the protocol says, if you're the delegate for this table view, you must provide me these two methods. If you don't put those methods in, you actually get a syntax error. It says you haven't implemented everything the protocol calls for, and it might even tell you what that is. For a table view, the two required methods, and by the way, this table view, we have designated that its delegate is the tip calculator view controller. Now, my mistake was tying it to a view. A view is just an object. It can't be a delegate. It can't process code. So when I first built this, and I think many of you did the same thing, I wired this to the view because that's kind of what it said in the tutorial. But us being newbies, we said, okay, I'll tie it to the view, not knowing that that isn't going to work. When I think about it after the fact, it doesn't make sense. It's like wiring a radio button to a text box and say the text box is going to handle my events. No, it's not. Even in C#, the form handles all the events for all the objects. It's the view controller in a way. And here, the view controller handles all of the events for all of our objects because we coded it to do that. That's what this view controller Swift thing is. When we designated, using the storyboard, when we designated that the view controller is the data source for my table view, and the view controller is the delegate for my table view, what happened automatically is the view controller became a data source and a view controller for the table as well. Okay. It's a delegate now. In the older versions in Objective-C, it used to say up here that not only am I one of these, but I'm also a delegate. Now it doesn't seem to say that anymore. But when we wired it, it became a delegate. And when it became a delegate, it was responsible for providing these two methods. If I take one of those out, I get a syntax error. Right here. And I don't know what it points to, probably near the top somewhere. But it says this view controller does not conform to the protocol for a UI table view data source. So it's talking about this one. I thought it was just a table view itself, but it looks like it's the data source that covers everything. This view controller is responsible for communicating to the table view. And now that I've removed that method, it doesn't follow the protocol anymore. Notice it doesn't give me a whole lot of clue here as to what the problem is. I don't know if it does if I scroll over a little bit. Nope. Can I get some details, please? How about from you? Used to be a way to reveal an issue navigator. It's not what I want. Double click that, doesn't help me either. Find, structure, discard, show the blame line. Blame for what? Nice. I seem to remember in the past, at least, that it would tell me what the problem was, which one I'm missing. It's not doing that here, so that's part of what we seem to need to know, or I'm missing it somewhere and it's not telling me what I need to know. But I know what it was because I blew it away, so I just undo that, and now this should go away. And it does. So how did we know that that was part of the protocol? Not very clear here. It was, I seem to remember it being clearer last year, that it would say, you haven't finished your protocol, you haven't implemented this method yet. And you simply create the method, and actually to fix it, you could click on it and it would fix it and it would create the skeleton of the method for you. But it seemed to be missing it here. I don't know if they just haven't implemented it yet, or if I'm dreaming this from another language, or where that came from.
Java.
Pardon me?
Java does it allows you to add.
To some extent, yeah, but that Java's so far in my past that I don't remember it, so that can't be what I'm thinking about. It has to be this. So, protocols and delegates. The delegate in this case is my tip controller, the view controller. The view controller is often the delegate because it controls the entire view. Why wouldn't it handle the event for the tip controller that I've thrown on there? So it's just a matter of wiring that. And maybe someday in the future they'll say, that's dumb, why do we need a delegate? Why can't we just automatically, like we kind of do with text views and switches and stuff, automatically make this the view controller? Maybe because if you did that, they'd have to include these 2 required methods immediately and these 8 optional ones, because who knows if you want them or not.
Maybe if you wanted to make it its own file.
You can actually assign it to this delegate here. There's an app delegate. And you can make that the delegate for the tip controller so that or for the table view. So when you click on the table view, it goes over here to this app delegate, but to me, that's just confusing. All the rest of my code's in here. Why wouldn't I want these 2 to be in here? If you're not 100% clear on delegates and protocols, then you've caught up with me. So I'm not either. Not completely. I think I understand the concept. And I've read 6 different descriptions of them and kind of put them together to come up with my picture of what delegates and protocols do. Go ahead, Jess.
I remember last year when we were making our class files, there was a way to comment, and it would make it basically in a group, like
A namespace.
a namespace.
Mhm.
Can you do namespaces that you know of in Xcode?
A
Because that would make it.
namespace or a region?
No, it was a namespace. Okay, I think is what he's talking about, where
Because it
all
would just
these.
let me say, okay, here are the delegates. Here are here's.
Oh,
my
yes.
variables,
Well,
that
okay,
thing.
you may be talking about regions. He may be right. First of all, namespaces aren't required in Swift. You can use them, remember what namespaces were for in C# was to say all of these objects are part of the same project.
Oh,
All right, that's part of what it was in C#. When you added your welcome screen, you brought the welcome screen in, its namespace was welcome screen, and the project's namespace was gas estimate. Well, the two of them couldn't communicate with each other unless you said namespace welcome screen dot welcome screen. The only reason you need namespaces, really, is if you have two classes or two include files that have the same method names in them. And now which method name are you talking about if it gets confusing? Here we don't need to worry about that. We brought in our tip calculator class, and we can refer to the tip calculator and all of its methods and all of its stuff and not have to namespace anything. And we can even bring in other include files. You've seen them, this import, to import your own in the future. If you import your own and it has a method in it that's already been imported by somebody else, then things can get confusing. That's when you need namespaces. And C# kind of put them in there ahead of time just to be safe. The other thing that you could do that is your region names, right, is to mark sections of code, right? Is that what you're talking about? Where I can just put a header on it and a comment to say, here's where all my validation routines are.
right,
And here's all of my
delegates.
whatever, right, yes, absolutely, you
Because to
can
me,
do
it's just
that.
kind of mixed within that code there, and I would not see it and go, okay, these are the delegates that I can play with to.
Well, but what it doesn't do is create them for you, unless I missed something along the way here. It doesn't create those delegates for you, and it's not telling me, this is what I was saying, I think it did last year, is it would tell me, here's the methods. Right, and so we'll have to keep our eyes open for that when we build our next project to see if there's something there that says, your TableView controller, you need these. Or if it's just in the documentation, and if you want to use a TableView, you, the programmer, have to be smart enough to say, okay, I'm using a TableView, so I'm going to need these two methods. That error message that I saw, it was better last year, I swear it was. It said, you're missing this function. Or there was a helper, right now it says, you want me to insert exclamation mark for you? Okay. There was a helper that says, click here to implement all the other methods. And it could also be that I haven't read far enough in my notes yet to remember. I'm now questioning myself and going, was there something up here on the menu where I click and say, give me the skeletons for all the prototypes? Or was it up here? And this guy? Paste, jump, structure, balance, that's not it. Discard, refactor, open, reveal, show, speech, source, toggle, add. No. So what I was kind of hoping is that by touching that, it would say, fill me in, give me all the methods. One last place I'm going to take a quick look is if I go back to the storyboard, and here I have the data sources, and this is the data source delegate. Does this tell me anything? Probably not. It's my table view. Do you tell me anything of what I need to invoke? I'll have to do a little research, and if anybody else finds it, let me know. Because it normally will, I remember it last year telling us that these are the methods you need to implement because of the prototype. Here it just told me, you're not done yet. Thanks. Now I probably have to go into the documentation someplace and find out what the table view still needs. So I don't have a straight answer on that one for you yet. What we also did for the first time in this unit is added a nav controller. The nav controller looks like a view, like a scene. That's what they call these, as scenes. It's kind of like a movie. Okay. It looks like a scene, but it's not really. It contains this. Right? And what the nav controller does is gives you the nav bar on the top. And then the nav bar can go to a different scene, and that second scene can have different buttons. And we're going to see those buttons in the next unit. So the nav controller, even though it looks like it's its own scene, isn't. I see these as kind of stacked on top of each other. And what I haven't also found is a way to shrink these down because they're awful big. Of course, right now I'm still doing my flexible stuff here. I think I can get rid of that, and that'll shrink it.
How do you get to that second screen?
Which second screen?
The,
The two side, but I'm just scrolling.
You can right click and do zoom to.
Oh, there it is. Pfft. I'm looking all over the menu and I can't find it, which makes no sense. But I can zoom here, thank you. That's better. Okay. But I still want to turn off my auto layout stuff. The more I mess with it, the less I like it. So I'm turn off the auto layout and then my windows will come up in the size. And we're just going to have to suffer through dealing with iPhones. Right? So really what I see is this thing stacks on top and it overlays it, is the way I envision it. Is it overlays it, and this nav bar up here gets overlaid here, and then you saw how you could change it, and the next unit will add buttons so that the nav bar changes. And the nav bar is just a controller so that when you click on the buttons, it remembers which one's the back button, which one's the forward button, what all these buttons do. So the nav controller isn't really a view. That's 50. Love to have something. Oh, here's the zoom in. Oh, those are lovely. Gonna have to use my elbow to get all those keys in there to zoom in and zoom out a little bit. And then it still went in big chunks, but that's still fairly manageable. Right. So that was new. Now finally, let's go back to the code and see if we can sort our way through this stuff here. And we also, and you also played a little bit in the sandbox, but the sandbox is very similar. Playground, sorry. In the playground, the code was very similar. So what we have here is now our view that implements the table view. So it's got a table view. In this case, the table view is only an outlet. All we're doing is sending stuff to it and displaying it. The protocol for a table view says if you're implementing a table view, you must provide a method named number of rows in section. What we haven't seen here is a table view can have multiple sections. So we're going to be building a little mini contacts list or birthday list. And I could have a family members section in the same table view, and then a little later split it and put in a friends section. So you can have multiple sections, and that's one of the methods. It's optional, it's not here, that defines the number of sections that you have.
Is that like when you scroll through your contacts list and it's got A, B, C, D?
Yep, some of that has to do with it if the A, B, and C show up. The stuff on the side is just a property that you turn on. If you have lots and lots of items in there, you can turn on a property that says, as I'm scrolling, show me a little map, if you will, of where I am. And you can click on the map and jump to the P's if you want to. That's a property. That's all it is. Number of rows in section is required. What it tells the table view is here's how many, not how many appear on the screen, but how many there are in this section. But we haven't designated how many sections there are, so there's only one section. And so how do we know how many items there are that we potentially would be scrolling through? That's what it's asking us here. How many items could we potentially be scrolling through? In this case, we went to our sorted keys, which comes from our class, if I remember right. The sorted keys is the list of tip possibilities, 10% to 15, 18, 20%. And then we counted them, and that said 3. So what this is basically telling the table view is maximum you're going to have to deal with is 3. That's probably good information for the table view because it's going, oh cool, I got 8 rows, I only got 3 elements to display. I don't have a whole lot of work to do here. So this is the first thing you have to provide, and most of the time it is the number of rows in your array, the number of elements in your dictionary, the number of records in the database. All of that kind of information can be quickly found, and you simply send it, or actually not send it, but define it in here. This is how many you may have to deal with, and that's required. Brittany.
Up in the calculate tab is where the sorted keys looks like it's made.
It's an output of that, right? So is it up here, sorted
Um,
keys, calculate
It's
tab?
down in there, but what I'm wondering,
Oh, here's the sorted keys variable. I have it too low. I should have it up above. But, so here's my sorted keys, which is just the 10, 15, 18%,
Mhm.
right?
But in the calculate tapped thing, it's assigned something,
Mm-hmm,
and the possible tips, which is an array dot keys.
yes.
What does keys mean?
Array.keys,
Basically, yeah. Line 34.
possible tips.keys. Possible tips is a dictionary, okay? And keys is built in saying, give me a list of the keys in this dictionary. Remember, the dictionary is a key value pair. You give me a key, 10%. How much is the total for that? 15 is another key. How much is the total for that? Or what's the tip at 15%? What's the next one? So when you're working with a dictionary, the dot keys is simply a list, an array. This converts a dictionary to an array of the keys that are available in there. That's all. And then we sort it. Why would we want to do that?
Doesn't show sorted in the list.
Because it shows sorted in the list. Why don't I just sort the dictionary?
Can't sort a dictionary.
Can't sort a dictionary. Okay, dictionaries cannot be sorted. You get them in the order that you get them. I think a couple of you discovered that in your playgrounds when you did the, which one was it? Was it the months? Yeah, days and months. Created a dictionary, and then when you displayed it, they showed up in some fairly random order. However, the dictionary decided to store them. So this shows you, that's another nice feature here, this shows you how you can sort a dictionary. You don't sort the dictionary, you create a second array called keys. You sort that, and then you walk through it and then pull the appropriate items out of the dictionary that match that second array. Is that clear?
Yeah,
Yeah.
that actually was.
Yeah. Huh?
So that actually was.
That actually made sense. So I picture two different things, an array and a dictionary. The dictionary is randomly ordered, and I'm sure it's not random, but it looks like it to us. And then here we have the sorted values instead. So you could go back to your months program, whatever that was, the unit 2 one, and create another array that says sort these. Unfortunately, they'd be tough to sort because if you sort months alphabetically, what do you get? Garbage. So now you got to figure something else out.
Another dictionary.
Another dictionary maybe that translates, yeah, or an array, a two-dimensional array,
How to sort.
or a structure, or yeah, you're getting good at sorting by that time. So you'd have to modify it here, but in this case, all of the keys are numeric. They're 15, 20, and 18 or whatever the other one was. This sorts them, and now we have, this is a separate array.
This may be a little off topic, but instead of, if that tax percentage slider, say that was the tip percentage slider that you said, do you then have to send that to the tip calculator model somehow?
You'd have to change the model, okay? Because right now, the way the model works is it gives you the tip on the pre-tax amount, okay? So you have to tell it what the tax amount is. This is just the way it's designed, right? You have to tell it what the tax amount is, and then it backs that up and figures out what your subtotal was before the tax, and then it just gives you a list of tips options from there on. If you wanted to modify the application so that the slider is your tip percent, now you're only asking for one instead of all. And that's a different model, so you'd have to have a different class.
Right, but is it just as simple as saying like, whatever your variable name is, like say it's tip calculator, to access the class file, would it just be like tip calculator dot whatever you name that variable equals the slider value?
Yeah,
Is that
or you'd send it in as a property. You'd have that as one of your properties.
properties?
Yeah, and we're gonna do another class in the next unit, or in this unit, so you'll get a little more comfortable with the classes. But you'd have to restructure this tip calculator because it doesn't have a tip
Right.
property. Okay. Now, you could also, instead of restructuring this, you might be able to just add another method to it that says, give me the tip. And you'd have to send it two pieces of information. What's the tax rate and what tip percent do you want? And then it would back you up to the subtotal, calculate one tip percent, and send it back out to you. But that's not what it does right now. And I think he did this on purpose just so he can display the results in a table view. Because before he displayed them in this big, huge text, forget, it's not a text view, what's the other one? The
Text-
big one, the what?
Text area.
Text area, something, yeah, text area, something like
I
that.
think it's text view here.
Whatever it was, he put multiple items in there so you can look at it and decide.
It was weird because when you went in there using the simulator, you could actually like touch in there and the cursor would.
Yep, there's all kinds of things you could do. All right, and that's the cool thing about the playground. You get to actually play with not only text and code like this, but even objects and visual objects and see what they do, as long as you code them manually. All right, so again, the tip calculator, when it's done, it returns a dictionary of tip options. That's what it returns by default. When you ask for calculate tip, return possible tips, you get a dictionary out. Okay, and this looks like maybe it's the old one. Oh no, here it is. An integer and then a tuple. Okay, and the tuple here is just him showing off using tuples. Instead of just sending us the tip amount, they also send us the total bill. Which is handy because every time I go to a restaurant and I figure out what tip I want to give, then I have to hand calculate in my head what the total is. So this would be, it's a handy feature, I would say. But that's the other thing we've got to remember is when you ask for the possible tips, you get a dictionary out that gives you 3 possible tips that were defined in the class. Here, okay, 3 possible tips. The value of the tip and the value of the total given the subtotal. So that's what comes out. Then in the ViewController, we take advantage of that. Okay. We did tell the TableView that you have this many rows to deal with. It's just 3. We could have hard-coded 3 here because our class always returns 3 things. But why not ask? And that way, if you do change the class, you don't have to modify this code. And then here's the real kicker. Then we said, for every cell, visible cell on the screen is really what that means. This method gets called automatically by the TableView for every single thing that you send it. And where the sending happens, we'll have to look for here in just a minute. I'm pretty sure it's in here. That still has a text field in it, so we'll have to look for that a little bit. That's the right one. But nothing in here seems to be updating the table view, but we know that happens when we click on the calculate button, so we'll go look at that in a second. But what this says is for every cell in that table, every cell has to have the same format. Not 100% true. You can actually vary the format of the cells, but you have to have some kind of value stored to say, this is a happy cell, this is a sad cell, and you can change icons and you can change colors based on some value. Could be a flag, could be a number. If the number is greater than 10, make it a happy cell. And you can define all these different cell layouts and actually have different ones in each one. If this feature is turned on, then make it black text with a turned on little switch on the side. If it's turned off, make it gray text with an off switch on the side. There's all kinds of things you can do with these things. But right now we're keeping it simple. We're just showing up some text. In this case, they're defining the format of the cell in code using value 2, whatever the heck that is. And Brittany and I were fighting with it a little bit, and there's not much difference in these values. But what we'll see in the next unit is you don't have to do this in code. You can do it at design time. I think I can do it here. Let's just take a quick look. Going back to the storyboard, here's my table view. And if I go back to its properties, I can't find one of the cells here. That's the problem. Well, let's see if I did one prototype cell. There we go. Here's my prototype cell, and I can click on that. Now I'm looking at the cell, and I can say that I want a basic cell. I want a right detail, left detail, or subtotal or subtitle. This is what I was looking for when we did this, because this is what we saw last year. It's a subtitle. You have a title and then a subtitle that's kind of underneath, which is different looking than anything we saw. Custom says, you tell me what it looks like. And I'm trying to remember, I haven't gotten deep enough in my notes to say that I'm going to show you how. I think that was the extra credit I've been thinking about. Can you customize the view?
How'd you get to that?
I first created the table view, and then I said, give me a prototype. So I had to turn on how many prototypes I want to see in my table view here. In the next example, it's already turned on. By default, it was none because we just dragged a table view in here. We can define different prototype cells. In this case, there's only one. If I click on the prototype cell, now I can define what that cell looks like. What color is it when it's selected? Is there any indentation? Are there any accessories? Like check marks, like plus signs, like arrows, like whatever. Okay. You can say that in all of my cells, there's a disclosure indicator. There's the arrow. Just got added to my cell automatically. We'll see this a little bit more in the next unit. But for right now, I'm going to put it back to where it was. Go back to my table view and put it at 0. If you don't like the layout of the cells, and Brittany and I didn't, right? I couldn't remember how to change them. Well, it's come back to me now. That happens when I read my own notes. Of course, it's the next set of notes. All right. So anyways, there's my table view. We can change it, change the appearance. But here we did it in code, said just use the styles for cell styles, predefined value 2 or value 1. I think Brittany ended up with value 1 because it was a little more left aligned than centered. There's only 3. The other one was default. And that one wasn't very good either. Then we said, give me the list of sorted keys. Take the list of sorted keys, which has to already exist. All right. And for the row that I'm on right now, that's the index path. Notice that gets sent in here. For the cell at index path, what's the index path? Well, remember those 14 cells that appear in my table? My rough estimate? Each one of those is indexed. Which one am I talking about right now? We never call this directly. This gets called automatically by the table view when we say fill it. It calls this over and over and over again for every one of the 14 rows. It does it automatically. If we scroll, it calls this over and over and over again to update the display. We don't have to call it. What we have to tell it is what to display. In the first row, whatever's in the first element of the array. In the second row, whatever's in the second element of the array. In the third row, whatever's in the third element of the array, and so on. And then as it scrolls, if the top one on the screen is number 10, it figures all that stuff out. It's magic. That's the good news, but we do have to tell it what we want. Since this tells us what row we're working on, we go grab from the sorted keys the corresponding tip percent. Then we use that tip percent to grab out of the possible tips the amount for that tip. And we use the same tip percent to say, give me the total. So all we're doing here is getting the information that we need. And then we just string it all together. Okay, we display the tip percent. Every cell has multiple components in it, multiple compartments, if you will, and you can put stuff in the different compartments. How do you know what the compartments are? If it's a custom cell, you built it. You know what it is if it's custom. Because you built it. You use a class. If it's one of these built-in ones like value 1, value 2, or the subtitle type, then you have to know what they're called. In this case, because we're using value 2, there is text. There's a text label and there's a detail text label. For the title, for the subtitle, there's a title text and there's a subtitle text. You just have to figure out what they are. And then we changed its text. And why we got all these exclamation marks? Because these are classes. This is a class. They could be optional. It might not be there yet. Maybe we didn't define the cell. I don't know why it wouldn't be there. It makes no sense to me. This is what I've been whining about for the last week, and I'm glad that most of you are whining with me. Like, that's dumb. I hope they fix it. My guess is that the Swift programming population would sometimes say, I'm getting sick of exclamation marks. Get rid of them. But most of the time it tells us, if you're getting errors and you can't figure out why, half the time the solution is, give me an exclamation mark. The challenge for me is, where does it go? I often have a this dot that dot 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 that, and where does the exclamation mark go? Where does it want an exclamation mark? Sometimes, like in this case, it wants it on all of them. Ouch. This is a label. A label is an object. An object can be nil. This is a cell that can be nil that has labels inside it that can be nil. That's what it's telling me. And I'm telling it, shut up, they're there. Trust me, I'm the programmer.
It's not there for every one of them.
The detail, the text label? It might not be. He's right. Right. But if it's not there, why would I be trying to put something in it?
You could add an exclamation point to the end of your let cell, could you? Like, so that cell is.
Here?
At the very end of the UI table view cell.
Over here? I don't know.
I'd be a little surprised, but. Now, can you take it off there?
And then you take it off here. Wow. Good. Syntactically, it's not complaining.
Figured if you could say it, it's not nil earlier, you would.
Yeah, then you wouldn't have to repeat it so often.
Yeah.
Makes sense. But again, but I can't do it on the stuff inside, right? Because the cell is already predefined.
Yeah.
So I can't do it on the stuff inside, but I can for the cell, and I'm just waiting to see. I thought I hit run. Is it launching? Yeah, it's coming up. See if this still works, because that would be a cleaner solution, right? Instead of exclamation marks all over the place, like Adam suggested, up here I'm saying, make me one of these, and I guarantee you it exists. And from that point forward, it exists. I think that's what we saw in the syntax when we were looking at it. This is a nullable variable. And in Swift, unlike all other languages, in Swift, all objects, classes, are nullable, period. They all are, by default. And since they're nullable, they could be null. And you should check for that. The exclamation mark says, I guarantee you. I love it. Cool, have a new solution.
I don't even need those exclamation marks after it's cell.
Yeah, have you updated yet?
Yeah.
You did?
I
Are
copied,
you in Yosemite?
No.
I copied code right off the comments section, and they don't have the exclamation point.
They don't have them here, but if you go down a little lower, they say you need these when you get to beta 6.1a version whatever, because all of a sudden things changed.
So if you delete your exclamation on line 52, it won't work.
Does text label and detail text label still have to be exclamation point?
Yes, because we can't control those and say, I guarantee you that those are going to exist. It's like you said, different value, different parameters for what the cell looks like might not have those. And so what you're saying here with the exclamation mark is, I guarantee you, actually the exclamation mark is unwrapping it and saying, go get it. I command you to go get it. What if it's nil? Your program crashes. To me, it's crazy. If my program crashes because it's nil, that's my programming fault, not some fault of this. My guess is it's very flexible, and now we can design these objects that have different pieces in certain circumstances. But if you're writing code, we can put a question mark on this too. Say, if it's there, give it to me, otherwise just skip this. That's what the question mark means, if I understood it right.
Well, that's what
The
you-
question mark means, if it's there, give it to me. If it's not, just skip this. Don't cause an error, just skip this. Well, in my table view, if it's not there, we're talking about every single row in the table view it's not there. What do you get in your table? Nothing.
What if it's optional, like the detail text label, for some reason, you always have the text label, but only once in a while you have the detail.
Mhm.
If you put the question mark there, would it grab it only for the ones that it
Yes.
was there? It wouldn't say, it's not
Yes.
there for one, I'm not checking for the rest?
Yes, and that's why for a while they had this mix of question marks, and some of the solutions and the tips that other people gave us had question marks in there. Question mark to me is kind of dangerous unless you know what you're doing, and we're supposed to be programmers and know what we're doing. Question mark says, if it's not there, just skip this. Don't throw me an error. Skip it.
Unless your code to fill the cells covers all different bunches of cell possibilities, but as you're going through, you're defining the cells as different styles,
Mm-hmm.
and then your code handles it no matter what style it's defined as.
Yes,
That's how you
but
would do
to
it.
me, I would rather have an if statement says, if it's this style, do this. If it's that style, do this. And it's an if statement. What do
Yeah,
we?
well, it is either way. It's just harder to read with
Yeah.
the question marks.
So, no, I don't think you can get rid of these because we have no control over the cell class. So we can't say again, that's basically what we're saying, go get it. Can I put a question mark there and make it happy? Yes. Basically says, if there is a text label, give it to me, otherwise skip this. I don't know which one, I kind of like the question mark better because I can see it. Question mark stands, that exclamation mark was hiding. Brittany had one that we looked at it for 10 minutes and couldn't figure out that it was there, and Justin came over like I often do and looked over his shoulder and said, there's an exclamation mark there, get rid of it. He saw it, but we didn't because we've been looking at it. They tend to hide. You know, this one out here, that tends to hide on me. So upside down semicolon. I don't know, it hides. So I kind of like the question mark better, but I don't like the fact that I have to use it at all. So this says for the tips, I think we're going to go to the board here and I'm going to stop the recording. I'm just going to explain it a little bit more with a picture that I can't draw very well. But for the tips, oh, I may wait a second. Yes, I can because I have this running. Here's my 1, 2, 3 tips, 0, 1, 2, right? When we build this table, the TableView automatically says, he said there's 3. So let's call this function, this one, 3 times. It does it automatically, throws it in a loop, probably a for loop. Okay, all behind the scenes, we don't have to worry about it. Calls it automatically and say, let's start with row number 0. So up here, the cell for row at index 0, this basically gives us a 0, and we say, give me the sorted key at position 0. Because this is the row. That's the row number right there. 0. That we're currently working on in this table. We're working in row 0, so give me sorted key 0. That's 15%. And put it in the tip percent. Then use that tip percent and go into the dictionary and give me the amount for 15% tip. And give me the total for a 15% tip. So now I have the $4.99 and the $38. They're not displayed yet. They're simply in these variables. Right? They're simply in the variables at this point. Now we say change the cell. Change its text label, which is this blue guy in the front. Why is it blue? Because that's how value 2 defines it. This blue. Okay. Change the text label to just use this tip percent, 15. With a percent sign and a colon after it. Then go to the detail label, which is this black stuff, and display formatted like this, the tip amount and the total. This is a different way to format your output. Here's a formatting string. Here's how I want it formatted. I want the T and an I and a P and a colon and a space. This is called a placeholder. I think we saw this in C#, right? Something very similar to this. When we were doing our percentages, and boy, we're taking you all the way back to programming logic beginning. Unit 6, when we were doing loops, we wanted these pretty outputs. We used the same kind of stuff. The $sign is not a format, it's just a $sign. Display the $sign, followed by whatever's in position 0. I take that back. This one's a little bit different. Formatted for 0.2f. 0 means however many you need on the left of the decimal place. but 2 decimals afterwards, and this is a floating point number, and the tip amount automatically gets plugged in there because it's a placeholder. Here's another placeholder, the total automatically gets plugged in there.
Every example I see online with this type of stuff is always F or float.
Yes.
Can you use D or C?
I think it's D. I don't know if there's a currency. I don't think there's a currency. I think there's a D, but it's not double, it's integer, believe it or not. I think there's a D. So if you wanted to format it with commas, for instance, so I'm pretty sure this puts commas in. You could do it. But this is just another way, it's like every other language, 6 different ways to skin that cat to make it display properly. So now we're saying display in this format the tip and the total. But then what happens automatically is the table view controller goes into row number 1. And it repeats the process. For row number 1, give me the tip percent, which is 18. Give me the amount for an 18% tip, give me the total for an 18% tip, and then display it. And do it again for the next row, the next row, the next row, the next row. What happens if there's more than, looks like there's about 6 rows here? It does a couple of more, and it stops. And then as you scroll, it says, oh, my view's strange, I'm going to change, and it automatically slides stuff up and fills the new ones down at the bottom. If you scroll the other direction, it automatically pushes stuff and automatically fills from the top. Magic. Until you can't, then it's smart enough to actually push that down and bounce and say, I can't go and bounce, I can't go any farther. It's animated. Automatically. Does that help? Understanding what this is doing. Brittany?
A little bit.
A little bit. It's better. Right? That's the risk of doing tutorials where they say, take this code, paste it. You don't have to understand it. Particularly when they gave you the solutions. Those solutions are my last resort. If you think you understand what the code does, then absolutely cut and paste it so you don't have to spend all that time typing it and maybe make a typing mistake. But you can't just cut and paste code if you're trying to learn, which is what a tutorial is supposed to do, right? You can't just cut and paste. You got to understand it. That's what the tutorial is supposed to be teaching you, is how you can build some of this stuff. In this case, how to mix with a table view controller. Or a table view. It's not a table view controller. That's different. That's what we're going to see in the next lesson. All right, that's better, as good as we get. Keep this handy. And thanks to Adam for telling us, we can simplify a little bit. Let's move the exclamation mark up a notch to here. Then we know that the cell always exists.